The October rain still sounds exactly like the night my father said, "Get out." 3 hours later, a stranger found me by the roadside. The only person who believed me. I thought being kicked out was rock bottom until I discovered the evidence wasn't just planted in my room, but woven into my legal paperwork. 13 years later. My father wants to meet. I am going back to finally end the game my sister thinks she won. My name is Delilah Wright, and for the last 13 years I have curated a life defined by precision. I live in a 28th floor apartment in Denver, a city chosen specifically because it is 1,600 m away from the damp, suffocating humidity of Briar Glen, Pennsylvania. My apartment is a temple of controlled variables. Everything has a place. My books are aligned by spine height. My coffee is ground to a specific coarseness every morning. I work in risk and compliance for a massive corporate entity. A job that pays me to look at chaos and organize it into neat, manageable columns of data. I am good at it because I learned the hard way that if you do not control the narrative, someone else will rewrite your history for you. But tonight, the precision is failing. It is raining in Denver. It is not the polite misty drizzle that the locals are used to. This is a violent thrashing downpour that hits the glass of my living room window with the force of handfuls of gravel. The sound is rhythmically aggressive. A relentless drumming that bypasses my noise-canceling headphones and drills straight into the base of my skull. It is the exact same sound. It brings the smell of wet asphalt and rotting leaves back into my nose, overriding the scent of my expensive soy candle. I am 28 years old, a grown woman with a 401k and a reputation for being made of ice. But the sound of this rain reduces me to a shivering 15-year-old girl standing on a porch, staring at a closed door on my kitchen counter. Sitting on the granite surface I paid for with my own money is a letter. It arrived 2 days ago, but not here. It was sent to the one address I have never changed. The one coordinates on the map that served as my only lighthouse when the world went dark. My grandmother June's house. June Callahan is the only reason I survived my teenage years. And she is the only link I kept to the town that tried to swallow me whole. She forwarded the letter to me in a priority mail envelope with a sticky note attached to the front that simply said, "Read it. Then call me." I have read it 6 times. The handwriting is jagged. The loops of the letters trembling, betraying a neurological decline that offers me no sympathy, only a cold observation of fact. The return address is stamped in blue ink. Seabrook Care Pavilion. It sounds like a resort, but a quick search on my laptop revealed it for what it is. A state-subsidized hospice and long-term care facility 3 towns over from where I grew up. The letter is from Gavin Whitaker, my father. For 13 years, there's been silence. Not a low hum, but a vacuum. When I graduated high school as valedictorian of a school district, he didn't pay taxes in. There was no card. When I graduated college, funded entirely by loans and scholarships, I clawed out of the system myself. There was no phone call. When I landed my first major promotion, there were no flowers. There was only the silence he chose the night he looked at me and decided I was garbage. And now he writes this. Delilah. The letter begins. I do not know if you will read this. The doctors say I do not have much time left. My heart is failing. Along with a few other things. I spend a lot of time thinking about the past. I know things ended badly. I know I told you to get out that night. But I hope you can find it in your heart to come back before I go. I need to see you. There are things we need to say. Renee tells me not to bother. But I need to try. Dad. I stare at the paper until the words blur. He used the phrase, "Get out." He wrote it so casually, sandwiched between self-pity and a vague medical diagnosis. I know I told you to get out. As if he had told me to get out of the kitchen because I was in the way of dinner. As if he had told me to get out of the car. He writes it as if it were a minor dispute. A parenting tactic that went slightly awry. He has no idea. He has absolutely no concept of the weight of those 2 words. He does not remember the way his voice sounded. Not angry. which would have been bearable, but cold. Absolute zero. He does not remember the click of the deadbolt. He does not know that those 2 words were not just an eviction from a house. They were an eviction from childhood. I put the letter down and walked to my home office. I do not need to turn on the light. The lightning flashing across the Denver skyline illuminates the room in strobe-like bursts. I go to the heavy filing cabinet in the corner, dial in the combination to the safe hidden inside the bottom drawer, and pull out a thick expanding accordion folder. It is gray, battered, and tied shut with a fraying elastic cord. I have carried this folder from my grandmother's guest room to my college dorm, to my first crappy studio apartment, and finally here to the 28th floor. I call it the storm file. Grandma June made me start it when I was 16, just a few months after the night that changed everything. At the time, I just wanted to forget. I wanted to burn Briar Glen from my memory. But June, with her steel spine pragmatism, grabbed my hand and said, "We do not burn evidence, Delilah. We archive it. Someday the bill will come due, and you will need the receipts." I sit on the floor and untie the cord. The contents spill out, organized chronologically. There is the intake form from the county hospital dated October 26, 13 years ago. Patient admitted 0315A. Hypothermia. Shock. Bruising consistent with fall. There is the police report filed by Officer Miller, the one Diane Mlan insisted on. Incident report. Minor found wandering State Route 9. No coat. Weather conditions. Severe storm. And then the deeper layers. The things June and I dug up later. The photocopies of bank statements. The pixelated printouts from an ATM security camera showing a figure in a hooded sweatshirt withdrawing $500 from my father's account. A figure that was distinctly 5 and taller than me. The pharmacy records for a prescription of OxyContin that was found in my underwear drawer. A prescription written for a man named Blake Heron. I run my finger over the edges of the papers. They are dry and brittle with age. But the ink is still dark. My father thinks this is about a rebellious teenager who got kicked out and held a grudge. He thinks this is a family spat that can be smoothed over with a deathbed conversation. He thinks he is the protagonist of a tragedy where he lost his daughter to her own stubbornness. He is wrong. He does not know that I know. He does not know that for the last decade while he was playing happy family with my sister Renee and my stepmother Mara, I was building a career based on forensic analysis of fraud. He does not know that I have looked at these papers 1,000 times, finding the patterns, the discrepancies, the impossible timelines. I am not going back to Briar Glen to hold his hand. I am not going back to offer him absolution so he can die with a light heart. I am not going back to hug Renee and pretend that we are just estranged siblings. I stand up clutching the file to my chest. The anger that usually simmers low in my gut is boiling over now. Fueled by the thunder outside. I am going back to finish the game. Renee thinks she won. She thinks she successfully exiled the problem child, kept the inheritance, and secured her spot as the golden daughter. She thinks 13 years of silence means I accepted the defeat. She thinks I disappeared. I walk back to the kitchen and look at the letter again. Renee tells me not to bother. Of course she did. She knows. Or at least she suspects. She knows that if I come back, the carefully constructed reality she built on top of my absence might start to crack. I pick up my phone and open the airline app. I book a one-way ticket to Philadelphia for tomorrow morning. I will rent a car and drive the 2 hours to Briar Glen. I will walk into that care facility. I will look Gavin Whitaker in the eye. And then I will look at Renee. The memory of that night hits me again. A physical blow. It was not just the rain. People focus on the storm because it is dramatic. They picture a girl walking in the rain and they feel pity. But the rain was just water. Water dries. Hypothermia is treated with warm blankets and saline fluids. The part that didn't heal, the part that still feels like an open wound in the center of my chest is the setup. I close my eyes and I'm back in the hallway of my childhood home. I can smell the lemon polish Mara used on the floors. I can see the stack of $20 bills sitting on my dresser, perfectly fanned out so they couldn't be missed. I can see the bottle of pills peeking out from under my pillow. It was a stage set. It was a piece of theater directed by my sister, produced by her boyfriend, and silently authorized by my stepmother and my father. He was the audience they played to, and he gave them a standing ovation. I didn't steal it. I had screamed, my voice cracking. I don't know how that got there. Stop lying. Renee had shouted, tears streaming down her face. Tears that stopped the second Dad turned his back. I'm scared of her. Dad. She's on drugs. She's stealing from us. What if she hurts Mara? What if she burns the house down? It was a masterclass in manipulation. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part is what I found 3 years later when I turned 18 and gained access to the financial records my mother had left for me. The accounts that were supposed to be locked. The education fund. The life insurance trust. They were empty. And they weren't just drained. They were transferred. Authorized. Signed for. My signature was on documents dated days when I was in school. My signature was on withdrawal slips from banks I had never entered. That night in the storm wasn't just about kicking a bad kid out. It was a liquidation event. They needed me gone so they could explain away the missing money. They needed me to be an addict, thief, a runaway. So that when the accounts showed zero, they could shrug and say, Dyla took it all before she left. They stole my past, my reputation, and my future. And then they threw me into a hurricane to cover their tracks. I look at the clock on the microwave. It is 11 at night in Denver. That makes it 1 o'clock in the morning in Pennsylvania. Grandma June will be asleep, but she told me to call. I dial the number. The landline rings 4 times. Hello. Her voice is raspier than I remember, thick with sleep, but alert. It's me. I say. My voice is steady. The shivering has stopped. You got the letter. She says. It is not a question. I got it. And I'm coming home. Grandma. I'll be there tomorrow night. There is a pause on the line. I can hear the hum of the old refrigerator in her kitchen, a sound that is more comforting to me than any lullaby. Good. June says it's time. He thinks he wants to see me. Say, glancing at the handwritten note. He has no idea who is coming through that door. Gavin is a fool. June says sharply. He always was. He let that woman and your sister lead him around by the nose. But Delilah. Yet, if you are going to see him and if you are going to see Renee, you cannot just walk in there with your anger. Anger is good fuel. But it is a bad map. I have the storm file. I say. That is the history. June says. You need the ammunition. What do you mean? I kept something else. She says. Her voice drops lower as if she is afraid even the walls of her empty house might be listening. I didn't put it in the file because I didn't want you to have it until you were ready to use it. Until you were old enough to understand exactly what you were looking at. My grip tightens on the phone. What is it? When you get here, go to the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. June says. Lift the false bottom. There is a blue envelope taped to the underside. What is in the blue envelope? Grandma? Your mother left it with me 3 weeks before she died. June says. And a chill that has nothing to do with the rain sweeps down my spine. She said. June. If they ever try to push Delilah out, if they ever try to take what belongs to her, you open this. But I couldn't open it then. I was too grief-stricken. And then everything happened so fast with the court orders. But I opened it yesterday. And in June says. Her voice hard as granite. It proves that the night they kicked you out wasn't just a plan Renee cooked up to steal some cash. It proves that the fraud started long before that night. And it proves that your father isn't just a victim of their lies. Delilah. My heart stops. What? Just come home. June commands. And bring the blue envelope with you when you face them. It is the key to the lock they put on your life. She hangs up. I stand in my kitchen. The dial tone buzzing in my ear. The lightning flashes again, illuminating the storm file on the floor. I thought I had all the pieces. I thought I knew exactly how they destroyed me. But as I look at the rain hammering against the glass, I realize I was wrong. I thought I was going back to punish them for a crime they committed 13 years ago. Now I realize I'm walking into a crime scene that is still active. Packed my bag. I pack the storm file and I pack a black dress. Not for a funeral, but because if I am going to burn their house down, I want to be dressed for the occasion. To understand why I'm driving a rental car back to a town that spit me out, you have to understand the architecture of the house I grew up in. I do not mean the physical beams and drywall of the split level on Elm Street. I mean the emotional load-bearing walls. When I was 10 years old, my mother died of an aneurysm that struck with the sudden violent indifference of a lightning bolt when her casket went into the ground. The foundation of our home cracked. My father Gavin did not leave us in the physical sense. He came home every night at 5:30. He ate dinner. He watched the news. But the man who sat in the recliner was a hollow shell. He had checked out of the business of parenting, retreating into a grief that looked less like sadness and more like a permanent gray fog. He stopped making decisions. He stopped noticing details. He simply existed. And in that vacuum of authority, my sister Renee stepped in. Renee was 14 when our mother died. In the narrative of Briar Glen, she was a saint. Neighbors brought casseroles and whispered about how brave she was, how mature for her age. And she was. She took over the grocery shopping, the laundry, and the scheduling. But what nobody outside the house saw was that Renee did not step up because she was selfless. She stepped up because she realized that if she held the keys to the household, she held the power. By the time I was 12, Renee was not just my sister. She was the gatekeeper to our father. If I needed money for a field trip, I had to ask Renee. If I wanted to go to a friend's house, I had to clear it with Renee. She curated the information that reached Dad, filtering out anything that might disturb his apathy. She became the perfect daughter, the one who held the family together. And I became the thing she had to manage. Then came Mara. 2 years after Mom died, Dad met Mara at a hardware store. She was not the evil stepmother of fairy tales. She did not scream or beat us. Mara was dangerous because she was quiet. She was a master of the path of least resistance. She moved into our house with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, constantly repeating her mantra. I just want peace. I just want everyone to be happy. Sounds benign. But in practice, it meant that any emotion that wasn't pleasant was treated as a personal attack on her. I was 12. Grieving. And messy. I did not want a new mother. I was polite, but I refused to call her mom. And I refused to perform the role of the grateful daughter in the happy blended family tableau she wanted to present at church. Mara took my silence as an insult. She would sigh loudly when I left the room, looking at Dad with wide, watery eyes, waiting for him to notice how hard she was trying. That was when the labels started. It began with Renee. She realized that to maintain her status as the savior of the family, she needed a contrast. She needed a problem to solve. I became that problem. It started with small plausible deniability sabotages. When I was 13, I missed the bus for a choir competition because Renee told me the wrong time. When I confronted her, she looked at me with genuine confusion and said, I must have misheard her. Dad, listening from his chair, sighed and told me to stop blaming my sister for my own mistakes. A month later, I was left waiting on the curb at soccer practice for 2 hours in the sleep. When I finally walked home, shivering and furious, I found the family eating dinner. Renee gasped and said she thought I had gotten a ride with a friend. She had assumed I was taken care of. Mara touched Dad's arm and said, Okay, Gavin, look at her. She is so dramatic. They built a file on me. Brick by brick. Delilah is forgetful. Delilah is irresponsible. Delilah has an attitude problem. Delilah is difficult for Mara to handle. By the time I was 14, the narrative was set in concrete. I was the erratic, jealous younger sister who was acting out because she couldn't handle the new marriage. I tried to fight back once. Just once. It was a Tuesday night and I cornered Dad in the garage while he was tinkering with the lawnmower. I told him that Renee was lying. I told him that Mara was not trying to be my friend, that she was cold and dismissive the moment he left the room. I tried to explain the gaslighting, though I didn't know that word back then. I just knew that reality was being twisted. Dad wiped his hands on a rag and looked at me with eyes that were exhausted and empty. He didn't see a daughter crying for help. He saw a source of noise disrupting his quiet evening. Delilah, he said. His voice flat. You are just jealous of your sister. Renee does everything for this family and Mara is trying her best. Why can't you just get along? Why do you have to make everything so hard? He turned back to the lawnmower. That was the moment I realized I was essentially an orphan. My mother was dead and my father had decided that the truth was too much work. But underneath the family dynamics, there was a second current running through the house, one that I was too young to understand, but old enough to sense. Money. My mother had been an accountant. She was smart, meticulous, and paranoid about the future. Before she died, she had set up specific financial structures for us. There were college savings plans, the 529 accounts, and a substantial life insurance policy held in a trust. The terms were rigid. The money was for education and welfare, and the bulk of it was locked until we turned 18. Renee turned 18 4 years before I did. She got access to her portion of the assistance funds, and she burned through it with the speed of a wildfire. This was the era of Renee wanting to be seen. She bought a brand new convertible that was impractical for Pennsylvania winters. She bought designer clothes to wear to her community college classes, which she rarely attended. She wanted to project an image of success and affluence that we did not actually possess. And then she met Blake Heron. Blake was 24, wore cheap cologne that smelled like desperate ambition, and spoke exclusively in buzzwords. He called himself an entrepreneur. He had a dozen business ideas, a mobile car wash app, a drop-shipping vitamin company, a crypto mining scheme before anyone knew what crypto was. None of them made money, but all of them required seed capital. Renee was infatuated. She saw Blake as her ticket out of Briar Glen and into the high life. She started funding his lifestyle. She paid for his lease. She paid for his business trips to Atlantic City. By the time I was 15, Renee was secretly drowning in credit card debt. The golden child was broke. I remember walking past her bedroom door late at night and hearing her crying. Hearing the hushed, frantic whispers into her phone. I can't ask him for more. Blake, there isn't any more in my account. She needed a lifeline. And there I was, 3 years away from 18. With a fully funded trust and a college fund sitting untouched in my name. This is where Mara stopped being a bystander and became an architect. Mara was not rich. She had married Dad, assuming he had a nest egg. But Dad's job at the plant was just steady, not lucrative. The real money in the family was in the trusts Mom had left. Mara had quickly realized that she had no legal claim to that money. It belonged to the children unless the financial structure of the family changed. I was sitting at the kitchen table doing geometry homework one evening about 6 months before the storm. The house was quiet. Mara placed a stack of documents in front of Dad while he was eating meatloaf. It is just a restructuring, Gavin. Mara said her voice was soothing like she was talking to a skittish animal. With the market the way it is, we are losing value on the girls' accounts. My friend at the bank said we should consolidate the management, put it all into a high-yield family trust where we can actually control the investments. Dad chewed slowly, looking at the papers with a glazed expression. He hated paperwork. He hated anything that required him to think about the future. Is it safe? He asked. It is safer than leaving it alone. Mara lied. She handed him a pen. It just gives us authorization to move things if we need to for their sake. Especially for Delilah. You know. She is not going to be responsible with money. Gavin. Look at her grades. Look at her attitude. Do you really want her getting a check for $50,000 when she turns 18? She will blow it on drugs or run away. I looked up for my homework. I have straight A's. I said. Don't interrupt adults. Marla snapped. Her mask slipping for a millisecond. Dad looked at me. Then looked at the papers. The seed had already been planted. Renee and Mara had spent 3 years telling him I was troubled, reckless, and unstable. It did not matter that I was on the honor roll. It did not matter that I had never touched a drug in my life. In his mind, I was a risk. You're right, Dad said. She's not ready. He signed the papers. I watched the ink dry, not knowing that he had just signed away my legal protection. He had authorized a change in the custodianship of the accounts. He had given Mara and Renee the power to act as trustees if and only if certain conditions were met regarding the beneficiary's stability. They had the mechanism. Now they just needed the trigger. Renee needed money to pay off her debts and keep Blake happy. Mara needed money to secure her own comfort and perhaps cover debts of her own that I wouldn't discover until years later. They needed my share. But they couldn't just take it while I was a normal, boring high school student living under their roof. That would look like theft. They needed a reason to access the emergency provisions of the trust. They needed expenses. They needed a crisis. If I was just a student, the money stayed locked. But if I was a troubled youth requiring intervention, or if I was a runaway who had stolen family resources, then the trustees could liquidate assets to cover the damages and pay for treatment. They didn't just hate me. I was a piggy bank that they needed to smash open. The tension in the house shifted after that night. Renee stopped being mean and started being watchful. She would come into my room and look around, her eyes scanning my shelves, my desk, my closet. She was looking for places to plant the evidence. She was scouting the location for the crime. I remember one afternoon, Blake came over for dinner. He sat across from me, chewing with his mouth open, wearing a watch that cost more than my father's car. He looked at me and grinned, a shark-like baring of teeth. So, Delilah, he said. Renee tells me you're going through a bit of a rebellious phase. I'm doing homework, I said flatly. Hey, we've all been there, he said, winking at Dad. Teenage years are tough. Sometimes you do stupid things. Sometimes you make mistakes that cost a lot of money. Renee kicked him under the table. I saw it. I saw the look she shot him. A mix of fear and warning. I didn't understand the script they were writing. I thought they were just being their usual awful selves. I didn't realize they were rehearsing. Mara cleared the table that night, humming a little tune. She looked at me with a softness that terrified me more than her anger. You know. We just want what is best for you, Delilah, she said as she took my plate. We just want to make sure you get the help you need. I went to my room and locked the door, jamming a chair under the handle as I always did. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the walls closing in. I felt like a prey animal sensing a shift in the wind, smelling the predator before seeing it. I didn't know that downstairs in the living room, I wasn't welcome in. They were looking at the calendar. They were checking the weather forecast. They were waiting for a storm. They were waiting for October. The plan was never just to get me kicked out. That would have been messy. And messy leaves room for questions. The plan was to erase me. To do that, Renee and Mara had to make sure that when I walked out that door, I did not look like a victim. They had to make sure I looked like a liability that had finally detonated. I learned later through the forensic accounting of my own life that Renee had found the loophole 2 weeks before the storm. She had been reading the trust documents, the ones Dad had foolishly signed, and she found the clause regarding incapacity and behavioral risk. It stated that if a beneficiary demonstrated acute instability or required mandatory residential treatment for substance abuse, the trustees Mara and Renee could assume full control of the assets to manage the crisis. It was a license to steal buried in legal jargon. All they needed was the instability. Since I was boringly stable, they decided to manufacture the chaos themselves. The logistics were terrifyingly simple. Renee already had the keys to the Kingdom Dad's debit card PIN. Dad was a man of habit and his PIN was his birthday. A fact Renee knew because she often ran errands for him. I'll pick up the milk. Dad, I'll get the gas for the mower. It was the perfect cover. On October 14th, 12 days before the storm, the financial setup began. It was not a single massive withdrawal, which might have triggered a fraud alert. It was a slow bleed. $200 here. $300 there. The withdrawals were made at ATMs that were just far enough away from our house to look suspicious, but close enough to be plausible for a teenager on a bike. Renee was the one making the withdrawals. I know this now because I have seen the grainy footage of a figure in a baggy gray hoodie. The face obscured, but the height undeniable. I am 5 feet 4 inches in. Renee is 5 feet 8 inches. The figure in the video had to stoop slightly to see the screen. But back then, Dad never looked at the footage. He only looked at the bank statement Renee handed him with the withdrawals highlighted in angry yellow marker. But the money was only the first layer. They needed a reason for the theft. They needed a vice. Blake Harlan provided the prop. He had torn his rotator cuff playing flag football a year prior and had a lingering prescription for OxyContin. He still had a half-full bottle that he kept for recreation. Renee took the bottle. She peeled the label off, leaving just enough sticky residue to make it look like someone had tried to hide the origin. It was a crude prop, but effective. A bottle of high-grade painkillers with the name scratched off does not scream misunderstanding. It screams addict. The final stroke of their genius was the digital trail. Renee went to a discount electronics store in the next town over and bought a pay-as-you-go burner phone. It cost $20. She created a contact in it simply labeled D. Then over the course of 3 days, she staged a text conversation between this burner phone and her own cell phone. She sat in her room typing out both sides of the dialogue. Burner posing as me. I need more cash. He is asking for the money by Friday. Renee. Delilah. Stop. You promised you were done. Dad is going to notice. Burner. I don't care about Dad. Just cover for me one more time. I will steal it from his wallet if I have to. Renee. I can't keep lying for you. This stuff is killing you. Burner. Shut up. Just stay out of my room. It was a script written by someone who had watched too many bad after-school specials. But to a terrified, checked-out father, it would read like a documentary. It painted Renee as the desperate protector and me as the spiraling junkie. Ma, true to her nature, did not touch the money, the pills, or the phone. She kept her fingerprints off the physical evidence. Her contribution was logistical. She was the timekeeper. She monitored my schedule with the precision of a prison warden. She knew I had chemistry lab on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which meant I didn't get home until 4:30 in the afternoon. She knew Dad walked through the door at 5:30 sharp. That 1-hour window was their stage prep time. I remember Mara asking me casually over breakfast on the morning of October 25th, "Are you staying late at school tomorrow?" Delilah. I have a study group, I said, chewing my toast. I'll be home around 5. Good, she said, sipping her coffee. Good to know. She wasn't interested in my academic success. She was confirming that the house would be empty of witnesses between 3 o'clock and 5. Mara also coached Renee on the delivery. I found out years later that Mara had told her, "You have to make him believe it instantly. If he has time to think, he might ask questions. He has to be in shock." Fear shuts down the logic centers of the brain. They chose October 26th because the weather forecast called for a nor'aster. A storm adds pressure, keeps people inside. It creates a backdrop of natural violence that heightens emotional violence. The afternoon of the 26th, I was at school, completely oblivious. In fact, I was having a rare, genuinely happy day. I had just gotten my chemistry midterm back. I had scored a 98, the highest grade in the class. My teacher, Mr. Henderson, had written excellent analysis at the top in red ink. I remember staring at that number 98. It felt like a shield. Thought, this proves I am good. This proves I'm going somewhere. I folded the test carefully and put it in my backpack, planning to show it to Dad. Thought maybe, just maybe, a 98 would be enough to wake him up from his zombie state. Maybe he would look at it and see me. Not the problem child Mara described. While I was sitting in the library feeling proud of myself, Renee was in my bedroom. She opened my bottom dresser drawer, the one where I kept my winter socks. She shoved the roll of cash nearly $800 in 20s deep into the back. She placed the label-scratched bottle of pills under my mattress, just close enough to the edge to be found if someone was looking for laundry. She placed the burner phone in her own pocket, ready to be revealed as the smoking gun. I walked home from school that day with a bounce in my step. The wind was already picking up, whipping dead leaves against my legs, and the sky was a bruised purple color, promising rain. But I didn't care. I had my 98. I stopped at the corner store and bought a Kit Kat bar with my own allowance money. I ate it while walking the last 3 blocks. When I got to the driveway, I noticed Renee's car was there. Blake's car was there, too. I felt a small knot of tension in my stomach. I hated when Blake was over, but I pushed it down. I told myself I would just go straight to my room and do homework. The front door was locked. That was odd. Usually in the afternoon, it was unlocked until Dad came home. I used my key. As I stepped into the foyer, the house felt strange. It was too quiet. The air felt heavy, charged with static. I started to walk toward the stairs, and that was when I heard them. They were in the kitchen. The vent in the hallway carried sound perfectly from the kitchen island, a quirk of the house's architecture that I had exploited many times to eavesdrop on conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. Is it done? That was Blake's voice. He sounded impatient. It's done, Renee whispered. Her voice was tight, high-pitched with adrenaline. It is all in place. You are sure he's going to buy it? Blake asked. He has to, Renee said. Mara said he is at his breaking point anyway. We just have to push him over. I paused, my hand on the banister. I frowned. I thought they were talking about a party. Or maybe Renee was asking Dad for money for a new car, and they were strategizing on how to ask him. Tonight is the end, Blake said. And I heard the distinct sound of a refrigerator door opening. Tonight it is done and then the money comes after. Shoo, Renee hissed. She will be home any minute. I froze. They were talking about me, but my 15-year-old brain could not process the magnitude of what I was hearing. Thought, are they planning to prank me? Are they going to try to get me in trouble for not doing the dishes? I could not conceive of a plot that involved legal documents and narcotics. My imagination was limited by my own innocence. I decided to make noise. I stomped my foot on the floorboard and called out, I'm home. The kitchen went dead silent. Renee poked her head out into the hallway. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide and bright. She looked like she had just run a marathon. Oh, she said. You're early. I'm on time, I said, shifting my backpack. Is Dad home yet? Not yet, Renee said. She didn't move from the kitchen doorway. She was blocking my view of Blake. Go upstairs. Delilah. Just go to your room. It wasn't a command. It was almost a nervous tick. She wanted me contained. She wanted me in the trap. I shrugged. Fine. I have homework anyway. I walked up the stairs, clutching my backpack straps. I went into my room. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. My bed was made. My books were stacked. The poster of the periodic table was still taped to the wall. I sat on my bed right on top of the mattress that was hiding the pill bottle. I opened my bag and took out the chemistry test. I smoothed out the creases. I propped it up on my desk, leaning it against my lamp so it would be the first thing Dad saw if he came in. Outside, the first drops of rain began to hit the window. Big, heavy drops. The sky turned black, plunging the room into gloom. I turned on my desk lamp. I heard the garage door rumble open downstairs. Dad was home. My heart gave a little jump. I grabbed the test paper. I wanted to run downstairs and show him immediately before Mara could start complaining about her day. Before Renee could start her drama. I opened my bedroom door and stepped out onto the landing. I heard Renee crying. It was a loud theatrical sob, the kind that carries through floorboards. I didn't want to tell you, Dad. She was wailing. I tried to handle it myself. I tried to protect her. What is this? Dad's voice was booming deeper and louder than usual. Where did you find this? In her underwear drawer. Renee screamed. And look at the messages. Dad, look what she is saying to her dealer. I stood at the top of the stairs, the chemistry test fluttering in my hand. My stomach dropped out of my body. The cold realization washed over me. Dealer Delilah. Dad roared. The sound of my name in his mouth was not a summons. It was an explosion. I took a step down, my legs trembling. Dad. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs. In one hand, he clutched a fistful of $20 bills. In the other, he held the orange pill bottle. Marla was standing by the living room archway, her arms crossed, shaking her head with a look of profound disappointed resignation. Renee was slumped on the bottom step, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Blake was nowhere to be seen, but I knew he was watching. Get down here, Dad said. His voice was shaking with a rage I had never seen before. It wasn't just anger. It was fear. He looked at me like I was a monster that had been living in his house, disguised as his daughter. Dad. I got a 98 on my test, I whispered, holding up the paper. It was a pathetic, nonsensical defense, but it was the only truth I had. Get down here, he screamed again, throwing the money onto the floor. The bills scattered like dry leaves. Don't you dare talk to me about school. Not when you brought this into my house. I walked down the stairs. I was walking into the storm, but the rain outside was nothing compared to the hurricane waiting for me in the foyer. I didn't know it yet, but the girl who walked down those stairs was never going to walk back up them. The air in the foyer did not smell like home anymore. It smelled like ozone and judgment, a sharp metallic tang that coated the back of my throat. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, the hardwood floor beneath my socks felt impossibly cold, as if the house itself had already withdrawn its warmth from me. My father stood in the center of the rug, his chest heaving. He did not look like the man who had taught me to ride a bike, or the man who had sat silently through dinner for the last 5 years. He looked like a stranger who had been handed a weapon and told to use it. The wad of cash lay scattered near his feet, $20 bills looking like fallen leaves. In his hand, he gripped the orange pill bottle so tightly that his knuckles were white. Dad, I tried again, my voice trembling. I don't know what that is. I swear. Don't, he said. It wasn't a shout. It was a flat, heavy command that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Do not lie to me. Not anymore. I'm not lying. I was at school. Ask Mr. Henderson. I was taking a test. And while you were taking a test, Renee sobbed from the stairs, her voice thick with a grief that sounded terrifyingly real. Your friend dropped this off. He said you owed him. He said you promised to pay him today. I looked at Renee. Her face was buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with the force of her performance. But for a fraction of a second, a microsecond that would burn itself into my retinas for the rest of my life, she peeked through her fingers. Her eyes met mine. There was no tears in them. There was no sadness. There was a cold, glittering spark of triumph. It was the look of a chess player who had just moved her queen into the killing position. "I don't have a dealer," I screamed, panic finally breaking through the confusion. "I don't do drugs. Dad. Please look at me. It's me. It's Delilah." My father stepped forward. He did not raise his hand. He did not strike me in a way I wish he had. A bruise would have been something I could understand. A bruise would have been something that healed. Instead, he looked at me with a detachment that shattered me completely. He looked at me as if I were a stain on the carpet that he finally had the resolve to scrub out. "I have tried," he said, his voice low and vibrating with suppressed rage. "I have ignored the warnings. I have ignored the missing money from my wallet because I thought you were just acting out. I thought you were grieving. But this," he held up the pills. "Narcotics in my house with your sister living here. You're dangerous. Delilah. I didn't do it. The messages are on the phone," he roared, his control snapping for just a second. "I saw them. I will steal it from his wallet if I have to." "That is what you wrote. Is that what I am to you? A wallet to be stolen from?" "I didn't write that." Mara shifted against the door frame of the kitchen. She took a sip from her mug, her eyes calm, observing the scene with the clinical detachment of a scientist watching a lab rat drown. "Gavin," she said softly, "she is not going to admit it. Addicts never admit it. They manipulate." She turned her gaze to me and her expression was almost pitying. "If you really need help, Delilah, you will learn from this. You need to hit bottom before you can climb up. We are enabling you by letting you stay here." I am fifth and I stared at her incredulous. "I have nowhere to go." "You should have thought of that before you brought drugs into our home," Mara said, her voice smooth as silk. "Before you threaten the safety of this family." My father walked to the front door. He unlocked the deadbolt and pulled it open. The sound of the storm rushed in instantly. The wind howled, a guttural animalistic noise, and the rain slashed against the foyer floor, soaking the wood in seconds. It was pitch black outside, a void of water and noise. "Get out," my father said. I froze. "What? Get out?" he repeated. He pointed into the darkness. "I am done. I am washing my hands of this. You want to live like a criminal? Go live like one. But you're not doing it under my roof. Dad, it is storming." I whispered. "It is freezing." "The police can deal with you," he said. "Or social services. I don't care. Just get out of my sight." I looked at Renee. She had lowered her hands now. She was watching, breathless, waiting for the climax of the scene she had written. I looked at Mara. She just sipped her tea. I looked back at my father. I wanted to see hesitation. I wanted to see a flicker of the man who used to carry me on his shoulders at the county fair. I searched his face for any sign of love, any sign of doubt. There was nothing. Just a wall of exhausted, misguided righteousness. "Go," he snapped. I didn't move fast enough for him. He reached out, grabbed the strap of my backpack, which I was still wearing, thank God, and shoved me. It wasn't a violent throw, just a forceful push enough to make me stumble across the threshold. My sneakers hit the wet concrete of the porch. The wind hit me like a physical blow, sucking the breath from my lungs. "Dad." I turned back, reaching for the door frame. He looked at me one last time. "Don't come back until you are clean." And then he slammed the door. The sound of the lock sliding home was louder than the thunder. Click. I stood there for a moment, staring at the wood. The porch light was on, illuminating the rain that was falling in sheets. I hammered on the door with my fist. Dad, open the door. Please. Nothing. No movement in the peephole. No shadow under the crack. I banged again harder until my knuckles stung. Renee, stop it. Tell him the truth. The porch light flickered and then turned off. They had not just locked me out. They had erased the beacon. I was standing in total darkness. Panic began to set in, cold and sharp. I reached into my jeans pocket for my phone. It wasn't there. I patted my back pocket. Empty. Then I remembered I had left it on the kitchen counter when I came in to get a glass of water right before the screaming started. I had no phone. I had no coat. I was wearing a thin long-sleeve t-shirt, jeans, and canvas sneakers. And I was standing in the middle of a nor'aster. I stepped off the porch. The wind almost knocked me over. The rain was freezing, hovering just above the temperature of sleet. It soaked through my shirt in seconds, plastering the fabric to my skin. I couldn't stay in the driveway. If I stayed, I would freeze. I had to move. My grandmother, June, lived on the other side of town. It was maybe 4 miles away in a car. It was a 10-minute drive on foot in a storm. It felt like crossing a continent. I started walking. I kept my head down, chin tucked into my chest to protect my face from the stinging rain. My backpack was heavy with textbooks, geometry, chemistry, history. The weight of my academic life now just a burden dragging me down. The streets of Briar Glen were deserted. The streetlights were halos of blurry orange in the mist. The wind whipped the trees, sending branches crashing down onto the road. I jumped as a large limb snapped nearby. The sound like a gunshot. My feet were soaked within the first 100 yards. My canvas shoes were useless against the puddles that had formed in the gutters. Every step was a squelch of icy water. My toes began to go numb. I walked for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 20 minutes. The adrenaline from the confrontation was wearing off, replaced by the creeping paralysis of hypothermia. I started to shiver. Violent, uncontrollable tremors that racked my entire body. My teeth chattered so hard my jaw ached. Why did he believe her? The thought looped in my mind like a broken record. Why didn't he ask me? Why didn't he check? A pair of headlights cut through the darkness ahead. I stopped, waving my arms frantically. Help! I screamed. But the wind tore the word away before it left my lips. The car slowed down. It was a silver sedan. I could see the silhouette of the driver. A man. He slowed to a crawl as he passed me. I stepped toward the road, hope flaring in my chest. Please, just let me use a phone. The driver looked at me. I saw his face illuminated by the dashboard lights. He looked at a teenage girl soaked to the bone walking alone in a storm at night, and then he accelerated. The spray from his tires hit me in the legs. A wave of dirty, freezing water. I watched the tail lights fade into the red mist. He didn't want to get involved. He probably thought I was trouble just like Dad. Just like Mara said. If you see a girl alone at night, she's probably a runaway. She is probably on drugs. Keep driving. The rejection hit me harder than the cold. I was invisible. I was garbage. Kept walking. But my pace slowed. My legs felt like they were made of lead. The shivering was starting to stop, which I vaguely remembered from health class was a bad sign. It meant my body was giving up on trying to stay warm. I turned onto State Route 9, the main road that connected the subdivisions. It was more exposed here. The wind roared across the open fields, slamming into me. I stumbled over a piece of debris, a hubcap or a rock. I couldn't tell. My knees hit the gravel on the shoulder of the road. Pain shot up my legs, hot and sharp, contrasting with the numbness. I tried to stand up, But my arms were shaking too much to push off the ground. Just rest for a second. A voice in my head whispered. Just close your eyes for a minute. I crawled toward a metal signpost. A speed limit sign. I sat with my back against the metal pole, pulling my knees to my chest. I hugged my backpack. It was soaking wet now. My textbook surely ruined. My 98 on the chemistry test was dissolving into pulp. The rain felt less cold now. It felt almost warm. That was the danger. I knew it. But I couldn't care. I closed my eyes. The sound of the storm began to fade into a dull, rhythmic thrumming. Dad. Thought, I'm sorry I wasn't the daughter you wanted. I didn't hear the car approach. I didn't see the headlight sweep over me. I only became aware of the world again when a door slammed nearby. Hey. A voice. A woman's voice. Sharp. Commanding. Not a shout of fear, but a shout of inquiry. I opened my eyes, blinking against the harsh white beam of a flashlight. A figure was standing over me. She was wearing a yellow raincoat, the kind construction workers wear. She was holding a large umbrella, but the wind was threatening to turn it inside out. Can you hear me? The woman asked. She squatted down in front of me, shining the light away from my eyes so she could see my face. She was older. Maybe in her 60s. She had short steel gray hair and a face that looked like it was carved out of flint. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and scanning me with terrifying speed. She looked at my dilated pupils. She looked at my blue lips. She looked at the lack of a coat. I tried to speak, but my voice was just a croak. I'm cold. Yeah, I bet you are. She said. She didn't coo at me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She reached out and touched my wrist, checking my pulse. Her fingers were warm and dry. Can you stand? She asked. I shook my head. All right. She said. I'm going to help you. My name is Diane. I'm going to put you in my car. It is warm. She hooked her arms under my armpits and hoisted me up with surprising strength. She practically dragged me to the passenger side of a sensible beige SUV parked on the shoulder with its hazards flashing. She shoved me into the seat and blasted the heater. The sudden warmth hurt my skin like fire. Diane got into the driver's seat. She didn't drive away immediately. She pulled out a notebook and a pen from the center console. She wrote something down. Then she pulled out her phone. She dialed 3 numbers. This is Diane Mlan, she said into the phone. Her voice was calm, professional, cutting through the static. I am on State Route 9 near mile marker 4. I have a female juvenile, approximately 15 years old. Severe hypothermia. Possible shock. She paused, listening to the dispatcher. You want it here? Mesmerized. She wasn't panicking. She was working. No, Diane said firmly into the phone, her eyes flicking over to me, taking in my wet backpack, my canvas shoes. The utter lack of preparation for a runaway attempt. No. Dispatch. Send a unit and send an ambulance. But tell the officers to bring a camera. She looked at me and her expression softened. Just a fraction. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. She had seen crime scenes before. She knew what evidence looked like. This isn't a runaway case, Diane said to the dispatcher, her voice echoing in the warm car, sealing my fate and saving my life in the same breath. She has no coat. She has no supplies. She didn't walk out of that house. Dispatch. This is an eviction. The fluorescent lights of Northwood County Hospital were not just bright. They were aggressive. They buzzed with a frequency that felt like it was scraping against the inside of my skull. I blinked, my eyelids feeling like sandpaper, and the world slowly resolved into focus. I was lying in a narrow bed with scratchy sheets. There was a tube in my arm, pumping warm fluids into my veins. A monitor to my left was chirping a steady, rhythmic beat that proved I was still alive. Despite my family's best efforts, I turned my head. The chair next to my bed was occupied. It was not my father. It was not my sister. It was Diane Milan. She was no longer wearing her yellow raincoat. She had on a thick gray K-black knit sweater and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She was reading a crumpled issue of Time magazine. But the moment I stirred, she folded it and placed it on her lap. She looked at me with that same flinty analytical gaze she had used on the side of the road. "Welcome back," she said. Her voice was dry, devoid of the saccharine pity adults usually smeared over traumatized children. "Your core temperature is back up to 97. The doctor says you are going to keep all your toes." "How long have I been here?" I croaked. My throat felt like I had swallowed broken glass. "About 3 hours," she said. "It is almost 4 in the morning." I tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness pushed me back down. "Did you call my dad?" "The police called him," Diane corrected. "And I called Child Protective Services." I froze. "CPS. But they will think I'm the problem. My dad told them I'm on drugs. He has the pills." Diane leaned forward. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Delilah, I spent 30 years investigating bank fraud. I know what a setup looks like and I know what a guilty conscience looks like. You were hypothermic, dehydrated, and terrified. You didn't look like an addict coming down from a high. You looked like someone who had been discarded." She paused and then she asked the question that would eventually become the foundation of my entire revenge. "Who benefits?" she asked. I frowned, confused. "What it is the first rule of fraud," Diane said. "If the narrative doesn't make sense, follow the money. Who benefits if you are labeled unstable? Who benefits if you are kicked out of that house? Nobody." I whispered. "My dad. He just wants a normal family." "Your dad is reactive," Diane said dismissively. "He is the weapon, not the shooter." "I'm asking about the others. The sister. The stepmother. Is there money involved?" "Delilah Inheritance Trusts." The word trusts hit me like a physical tap on the forehead. "My mom," I said slowly. "She left accounts for college and insurance. And who controls them?" "My dad." "But Mara made him sign papers to restructure." Diane's eyes narrowed. A predator spotting movement in the grass. Restructure. Interesting word. Does the access change if you are, say, sent to rehab or declared a ward of the state? I didn't know the answer then. But the question planted a seed of ice in my stomach. "Think so," I said. "Renee said she said once it is done, the money comes after." Diane nodded. "Once." Sharp and decisive. "Okay. That is what I needed to know." Just then, the door to the hospital room swung open. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The sterile quiet was shattered by the arrival of Gavin Whitaker. My father walked in with the stride of a man who has rehearsed his lines. He was wearing his coat, his face set in a mask of grim determination. Renee was right behind him, her eyes red-rimmed, clutching a tissue. They looked like the picture of a distraught family coming to collect their wayward sheep. "Delilah," my father said, his voice booming. He moved toward the bed. "Thank God you are alive. We have been so worried." He reached for me. "Sit back, Mr. Whitaker." The voice did not come from Diane. It came from the corner of the room, from the shadows. I hadn't noticed. A police officer, Officer Miller, stepped forward. Beside him was a woman with a clipboard and a weary expression, the caseworker from CPS, whose name I would learn was Ms. Vasquez. My father stopped, his hand hovering in midair. He looked around the room, realizing for the first time that this was not a private family reunion. It was a tribunal. "I am her father," Dad said, bristling. "I am here to take her home. We have a lot to discuss about her behavior. There will be no taking anyone home right now, Ms. Vasquez said. She stepped between my father and the bed. We have an open file regarding an incident of child endangerment. Endangerment? Renee squeaked. She stepped out from behind Dad, pulling her cardigan tighter around herself. No. You don't understand. Delilah ran away. We tried to stop her. She was having an episode. She's on drugs. We found pills. Renee looked at me, her eyes pleading, begging me to play along with the script. Be the junkie. Delilah. Be the problem so we can be the heroes. She didn't run away. Diane sat from her chair. She didn't stand up. She didn't have to. Her authority filled the room from the seated position. I found her 4 miles from your house. She was wearing canvas sneakers and a t-shirt in 34-degree rain. No coat. No phone. No wallet. Diane turned her gaze to my father. Tell me, Mr. Whitaker, if your daughter ran away in a storm, why was the deadbolt locked when the police did a drive-by of your residence an hour later? Dad's face drained of color. I locked it out of habit. I was angry. You locked a child out in a noraster because you were angry? Vasquez asked. She made a note on her clipboard. The scratching sound of the pen was loud in the silence. She brought narcotics into my house. Dad shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. She is a danger to herself. She threatened her sister. I didn't. He cried out, struggling to sit up. It was Renee. Renee planted them. Oh. Stop it, Renee wailed, bursting into fresh fake tears. She always does this. She blames me for everything. Dad. I told you she would lie. Enough, Officer Miller said. His hand rested near his belt. This isn't a debate, Mr. Whitaker. Your daughter was admitted with stage 1 hypothermia. If that woman hadn't found her, we would be having this conversation at the morgue. That makes this a police matter. I was trying to teach her a lesson, Dad muttered. But the conviction was leaking out of him. He looked small. He looked like he was realizing that the rules of his house did not apply in the real world. A lesson. The new voice cut through the air like a whip. We all turned to the door. Standing there shaking a wet umbrella was June Callahan. My grandmother was 80 years old. She was barely 5 feet 2 inches, but in that moment she looked 10 foot tall. She was wearing a trench coat over her nightgown, and her white hair was wild from the wind. She looked at Gavin Whitaker with a hatred so pure it could have distilled water. Grandma, I whispered, and the tears I had been holding back finally broke. June didn't look at me yet. She marched straight up to my father. Who gave you permission? She asked. Her voice was low, trembling with a rage that terrified even the police officer. Who gave you the right to throw my daughter's child into the rain like a bag of trash? June. You don't know the whole story, Dad stammered. He took a step back. He had always been afraid of June. Delilah is out of control. Mara and I. Mara. June spat the name like a curse. I don't care what that woman whispered in your ear, Gavin. You are the father. It was your job to protect her, and instead I get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning saying my granddaughter's in the hospital because you locked the door. June turned to him. Vasquez. I am June Callahan. I am the maternal grandmother. I am requesting emergency temporary custody immediately. Now wait a minute. Dad said, trying to regain ground. You can't just take her. She is my daughter and you just admitted to endangering her. June snapped. She reached into her massive purse and pulled out a phone. I have Harold Clean on the line. He is already drafting the petition for the magistrate. Do you want to argue with him, Gavin? Or do you want to explain to a judge why you shouldn't be arrested for neglect? Right now. The name Harold Klein sucked the remaining air out of the room. Harold was the most vicious divorce and family attorney in the tri-state area. Even Dad knew who he was. Renee tugged on Dad's sleeve. "Dad," she whispered. "Dad. Let her go. If they investigate, if they look at the house." She stopped, catching herself. But Diane heard it. I saw Diane's head snap up. Dad looked at Renee, then at the police officer, and finally at me. He looked defeated. "Fine," he said. "If June wants to deal with her, fine. Take her. See how you handle the lying and the stealing. There will be no contact." Vasquez said, stepping in. "Until our investigation is complete, Mr. Whitaker, you are not to contact Delilah. No phone calls. No visits. If you come to Mrs. Callahan's house, you will be arrested for trespassing." Dad didn't say goodbye to me. He didn't look at me. He just turned around and walked out. Renee lingered for a second. She looked at me and the mask was gone completely. There was fear in her eyes now. Panic. She realized that by kicking me out, they had lost control of the one thing they needed to control the witness. "We were just trying to help you," she hissed low enough that only I could hear. "Get out," I said. It was the first time I had used his words. Renee flinched, then turned and ran after Dad. The room exhaled. June rushed to the bedside, her hands, covered in liver spots and shaking slightly, cupped my face. "Oh, my sweet girl. Oh, Delilah, I am so sorry. I am so sorry I wasn't there sooner. I didn't do it. Grandma." I sobbed into her coat, which smelled of rain and peppermint. "I didn't steal anything." "I know," she soothed, stroking my wet hair. "I know you didn't. We are going to fix this." Diane stood up. She buttoned her sweater. "I gave my statement to the officer," she said to June. "And I gave the caseworker my card. If you need anything at all." June looked at the stranger who had saved my life. "Thank you," June said. "I don't know how to repay you." Diane walked over to June. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a murmur so the police officer wouldn't hear. "Don't repay me," Diane whispered. "Just do one thing. Check the father's bank records. Not just for the last week. Go back a year." June frowned. "Why?" Diane glanced at the empty doorway where Renee had just vanished. "Because that sister didn't look like she was grieving a drug addict," Diane said softly. She looked like an embezzler who just realized she lost her scapegoat. I have seen that look on 100 faces in federal court. Check the records. "June, this smells familiar." Diane gave me one last nod, a silent soldier salute, and walked out of the room. I lay back against the pillows, holding June's hand. The sun was starting to rise outside the window, casting a gray watery light over the world. I was safe. But as I watched the dust motes dance in the light, I realized the storm wasn't over. The rain had stopped. But the war had just begun. And thanks to Diane, I finally had a weapon. The week following the storm did not feel like recovery. It felt like an autopsy of my life. I was staying in my grandmother June's guest room, surrounded by floral wallpaper and the smell of lavender detergent. But I spent my days at her dining room table. That table had become the headquarters of a quiet, ruthless insurrection. There were no cookies or tea served there anymore. Instead, the oak surface was buried under stacks of manila folders, printouts of bank statements, and legal pads covered in Harold Klein's spidery handwriting. My father was not allowed to call and Renee had gone silent. But the machinery of the state was grinding forward because I had been admitted to the hospital with injuries resulting from a parental lockout. Child Protective Services and the local police had opened a joint inquiry. They weren't just looking at the night of the storm. They were looking at the cause. My father had justified his actions by claiming I was a criminal. Now, the authorities were fact-checking his claims. And unlike my father, the detectives did not rely on emotional outbursts. They relied on timestamps. It started on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at the table wrapped in one of June's oversized cardigans, watching Diane Mlan work. Diane had not gone home. She had practically moved into June's kitchen, treating this case like one of her old bank fraud investigations. She sat with a cup of black coffee and a highlighter, her eyes scanning lines of data with terrifying speed. "Here is the first crack in the dam," Diane said, tapping a piece of paper. Harold Clean, June's attorney, looked over his reading glasses. The withdrawal, Diane confirmed. She looked at me. "Delilah, your father claims you stole $500 from his account on October 14th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He showed the police the withdrawal slip. I was at school," I said. "I have chemistry lab until 3. "Exactly," Diane said. "But we didn't just rely on your word. Officer Miller pulled the school attendance records. You were marked present. Then he interviewed your teacher, Mr. Henderson. He confirmed you were in the lab partnering with a girl named Sarah mixing volatile chemicals under supervision. You did not leave the room. So, who took the money?" June asked. Her hands clenched in her lap. Diane slid a grainy black and white photo across the table. It was a still frame from the bank's ATM camera. "The police subpoenaed this yesterday," Diane said. "Look at the timestamp. 2:05 in the afternoon. Now look at the person." I leaned in. The figure was wearing a baggy gray hoodie, the hood pulled low. But the person was standing flat-foot in front of the machine. The screen was at eye level for them. "I am 5 feet 4 inches. I whispered. "I have to stand on my tiptoes to see the glare on that screen. That person is tall. And look at the wrist." Diane pointed with the cap of her highlighter. There, peeking out from the sleeve of the hoodie, was a silver charm bracelet. It was blurry, but the shape was distinctive. "Renee," I said, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. "She wears that bracelet every day. She says it is her lucky charm. So, we have Renee withdrawing cash from your father's account at a time when you have a rocklet alibi," Harold said, making a note on his pad. "That destroys the theft narrative. Gets worse," Diane said. She picked up another document. "Let's talk about the pills. The police ran the prescription number on the bottle your father handed over. It was issued to Blake Harlan for a shoulder injury 6 months ago. We knew that," I said. "He left them at the house." "No," Diane said, a dark smile playing on her lips. "He didn't just leave them. According to the police report filed by Blake Harlan himself, he reported that bottle lost or stolen. He filed the report on October 28th. I did the math in my head. Wait, October 28th? That was 2 days after Dad kicked me out. Bingo," Diane said. "Your father claimed he found the bottle in your room on the 26th. He handed it to the police on the night of the 26th. So, how could Blake report it missing on the 28th? If Blake thought it was lost, why didn't he report it sooner? And if he knew it was in your room, why file a report at all? Unless he was trying to create a paper trail after the fact to cover his tracks." "He panicked," Harold said, "when he heard the police were involved with Delilah. He tried to file a report to make it look like Delilah had stolen them from him, but he messed up the dates. He filed the report after the evidence was already in police custody. It is a logical impossibility." Diane said. "It proves the evidence was planted and it proves Blake Heron is a liar." But the piece of evidence that truly shattered Renee's story was the burner phone. The police had taken the device my father confiscated. They traced the serial number. It was a cheap pay-as-you-go model sold at a convenience store called the Quick Stop on the edge of town. They pulled the security footage from the store. Diane said, She opened a folder and produced another photo. This one was in color. October 23rd. 7 in the evening. The photo showed the counter of the store. A hand was placing cash on the counter for the phone. The person was out of frame, obscured by a display of potato chips. You can't see the face, June said. Frustrated. No. Diane said. But look at the window. The front of the store was a wall of glass. Beyond the shelves, in the dark parking lot, a car was illuminated by the neon store sign. It was a bright yellow Volkswagen Beetle with a custom vanity plate. Renee's car. There is no way to argue this in court, Harold said, leaning back in his chair. Renee bought the phone. Renee sent the texts. Renee withdrew the money. It was a conspiracy. But why? I asked. I felt a headache forming behind my eyes. Why go to all this trouble just to get me out of the house just because she hates me? Diane stopped highlighting. She took off her glasses and looked at me with a solemn expression. Delilah, people do not commit complex fraud just because they are mean, she said. They do it because they are desperate. I asked you to think about who benefits. So, I took the liberty of looking deeper into your father's finances. I asked June to get me copies of the restructuring documents Mara had him sign. She pulled a thick stack of papers from the bottom of the pile. Mara is smart. Diane said she didn't steal anything directly. She just created the pathways. She convinced your father to consolidate the accounts into a single operating fund for family expenses. And she set it up so that any transaction under $500 didn't require dual authorization. $500 isn't that much, I said. It is when you do it 3 times a week for 18 months, Diane said. She flipped the page to a spreadsheet she had created. It was a sea of red ink. Venmo transfers, PayPal payments, cash withdrawals, gas station charges, online gambling sites, crypto exchanges. Diane ran her finger down the list. It started small. $50 here. $100 there. But then it ramped up. And do you know where the digital transfers went to? An account linked to an email address? B. Harland Enterprises. Blake? I whispered. In the last 18 months, Diane said, her voice hard. Your sister and her boyfriend have drained $42,000 from your family's accounts. That is not teenage spending money. Delilah. That is grand larceny. The room went silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. $42,000. June repeated, her face pale. Gavin doesn't know. Gavin is asleep at the wheel. Diane said he thinks they are just scraping by because of the economy. He has no idea his daughter is bleeding him dry. So that is why I said the realization hitting me like a physical blow. That is why they needed to get rid of me. It wasn't about the college money. Not yet. No. Diane said they had already spent the liquid cash. They were in a hole, and they knew that eventually your father would notice $40,000 missing, or you would turn 18 and ask to see the statements for your own accounts. They needed a scapegoat. They needed someone to blame for the missing money. If I am a drug addict, I said, my voice shaking. Then I stole the money to buy drugs. Exactly. Harold said. Renee was going to pin the entire $42,000 loss on you. She was going to say you stole it over the last year to feed your habit. And by kicking you out, they closed the investigation before you could defend yourself. I felt sick. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at June's garden. It was peaceful out there. But inside my head, a storm was raging. My sister hadn't just betrayed me. She had methodically planned to frame me for a felony to cover her boyfriend's gambling debts and failed business schemes. What do we do? Asked, turning back to them. June stood up. She walked over to the sideboard and pulled out a heavy 3-ring binder. It was black and empty. She placed it on the table with a heavy thud. We organize, June said. Diane, I want every single piece of paper you found in this binder. The photos. The bank statements. The police report. The school attendance record. Everything. She looked at me. Delilah. Come here. I walked over to the table. This is your war binder, June said. From this day forward, you do not trust anyone's word. You trust what is written down. You trust what can be proven. You are going to learn how to read these statements. You are going to learn how to spot a lie on a piece of paper. I touched the cool plastic cover of the binder. It felt like a shield. We are going to court, Harold said. I am filing for permanent guardianship for June, and I am filing a motion to compel a full forensic accounting of your father's estate. We are going to blow this wide open. But there is one more thing, Harold said. His voice changed, dropped an octave, becoming serious in a way that made the hair on my arm stand up. He reached into his briefcase. He didn't pull out a copy. He pulled out an original document. The paper slightly yellowed. When I went to the courthouse to file the emergency petition, Harold said, I pulled the existing file on your mother's trust just to see what we were dealing with. He placed the document on top of the war binder. This is a power of attorney. Harold said it grants Renee Whitaker full legal authority to make medical and financial decisions for Delilah Wright, effective immediately upon signature. I stared at the paper at the bottom. There was a signature. Delilah Wright. I never signed that, I said. I have never seen that paper in my life. I know you didn't, Harold said. Because this document is dated October 20th. You were in school. And more importantly, the notary stamp on this document belongs to a man named Carl Vance. Who is Carl Vance? June asked. He is a notary public who lost his license 3 years ago for fraud, Harold said. But here is the kicker. I looked him up. He's Mara's cousin. Diane let out a sharp breath. Mara Renee was stealing the cash, Harold said. Tapping the document. But Mara was playing a longer game. This document doesn't just give them control over your money, Delilah. It gives them control over you. If this had been filed and accepted, they could have committed you to a facility without your consent. They could have signed loans in your name. They could have owned you. I looked at the forged signature. It looked a little bit like mine, but the loop on the D was wrong. It was a clumsy imitation. They weren't just kicking me out. I whispered. They were trying to enslave me. This changes things, Diane said. Her eyes cold as steel. Theft is one thing. This is conspiracy to commit human trafficking of a minor's rights. This is prison time. Harold closed his briefcase. I am going to call the district attorney. He said the family court hearing is next week. But I think we need to bring a few extra chairs because this isn't just a custody hearing anymore. It is a crime scene. The month leading up to the court hearing was a period of strange suspended animation. I was living in two worlds simultaneously. In one world, I was a normal teenager trying to restart her life. June enrolled me in Northwood High, a school 3 towns over where nobody knew my name or the rumors my sister had spread. I went to class. I ate lunch with new people who didn't ask why I was living with my grandmother. And I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Iris. Dear. Iris was a small, quiet woman who didn't let me get away with self-pity. You are not a problem to be solved, Delilah. She told me during our second session. You are a person who was placed in a hazardous environment. Your reaction. Anger. The confusion is a healthy response to an unhealthy situation. It took me weeks to believe her. For 5 years, I had been told I was the broken gear in the family machine. Unlearning that was harder than learning the new bus route. But in the other world, the world of June's dining room table, I was a soldier in training. June established a rule on the first night. Stability first. Justice second. I had to do my homework. Eat 3 meals a day. and sleep 8 hours before I was allowed to touch the war binder. But once the chores were done, the dining room became a war room. Harold Klein was aggressive. He filed for long-term guardianship, citing irreconcilable neglect and financial exploitation. He also slapped a temporary restraining order on Renee. It was a humiliating blow for her. The order meant she couldn't come within 500 feet of my new school or June's house in a small town like ours. That was a public scarlet letter across town. The house of Whitaker was crumbling. News travels fast in Briar Glen. The sight of police cars at the hospital and the involvement of Diane Mlan, who was known locally as a woman you did not mess with, had started the Whisper Network. People looked at my father differently in the grocery store. They stopped asking how are the girls and started looking at his shoes. My father, Gavin, was not built for conflict. He was a man who wanted to be liked, who wanted a quiet life. The social shame was eating him alive. He started calling June's house, leaving long rambling voicemails where he sounded drunk or just exhausted. June, please can we just talk? I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted to scare her straight. I didn't know about the money. Mara says we can work this out. Always Mara. Diane, who was still coming over every evening to review the files, listened to one of the voicemails and shook her head. She is managing him, Diane said. She is keeping him isolated so he doesn't hear the truth. She is telling him that you are the one dragging this out, that you are the vindictive one. Renee, however, was not managing anything well. Stripped of her good sister persona, she was spiraling. According to friends of friends on social media, she was telling anyone who would listen that I was a master manipulator, that I had tricked the police, that I had framed Blake. But her narrative hit a wall when the real world intervened. 3 weeks before the hearing, a twist landed on our doorstep that nobody, not even Diane, had predicted. Blake Harland was arrested. It didn't happen in Briar Glen. It happened in Delaware. He was pulled over for speeding in a car that turned out to be leased under a stolen identity. When the police searched the trunk, they found a laptop containing credit card numbers for 30 different people. None of them him. Blake was not a mastermind. He was a petty grifter who had gotten lucky with a naive girlfriend. Now that he was facing federal wire fraud charges in Delaware, his loyalty to Renee evaporated faster than a puddle in the sun. Harold got the call from Blake's public defender on a Thursday afternoon. He put it on speakerphone in June's kitchen. Mr. Harlan is looking to make a deal, the public defender said. His voice tinny through the phone. He has information regarding a fraud scheme in Pennsylvania involving a miners' trust fund. He is willing to provide a sworn deposition if the prosecutor agrees to recommend leniency on the identity theft charges. We are listening, Harold said, his pen hovering over his legal pad. Mr. Harlan says the plan to frame Delilah Wright was entirely Renee Whitaker's idea. The lawyer said he admits to providing the pills, but he claims Renee asked for them. He also claims that there is a third party involved, a silent partner who directed the financial restructuring that made the theft possible. Mara, I whispered. Does he have a name? Harold asked. He says Renee referred to her as the manager, the lawyer said. He says this manager coached Renee on how to forge the signatures so they wouldn't look too shaky. Told her to practice tracing them against a window. Diane leaned forward. Tracing signatures. That is a specific technique. Amateurs usually just try to freehand it. Tracing suggests someone who knows how document verification works. She pulled out the forged power of attorney. She held it up to the light. See the hesitation marks? The ink is thicker at the curves. That happens when you are moving the pen slowly, tracing a line underneath. A natural signature is fast and fluid. This was drawn, not written. So Mara taught her how to forge, June said, her voice cold. But why? Why risk jail for $40,000? Mara isn't stupid. That is not enough money to retire on. It is if you are desperate, Diane said. I did some digging on Marla's maiden name. Mara Vance. Diane opened a new folder. Mara has a secret, too. Before she married Gavin, she was living in Ohio. She co-signed a business loan for an ex-boyfriend who opened a chain of tanning salons. The business went under 5 years ago. The boyfriend declared bankruptcy, but Mara didn't. The debt collectors have been chasing her for years. The outstanding balance with interest, $45,000. The room went silent. The numbers aligned perfectly. She needed the money to pay off her old debt, I said. The realization settling over me. She was stealing from us to pay for a mistake she made a decade ago. And she couldn't tell Gavin, June said. Because Gavin prides himself on being debt-free. Except for the mortgage. If he knew she came into the marriage with that kind of baggage, he might have walked. So, she used Renee. I said. She saw Renee was desperate for Blake's approval, and she used her. She let Renee take the cash. Let Renee leave the digital trail. Let Renee take the risk. And Mara just took her cut. She is a parasite, Harold said, closing the folder. But proving she directed it is hard. It is hearsay. Blake says. As Renee said. Mara helped. That is second-hand. We need something that ties Mara directly to the crime. Diane said something with her handwriting. Something she touched. That night, I started a new habit. I took a blank notebook and wrote evidence log on the cover. I started writing down everything. Every conversation I remembered. Every date. Every time Mara had asked me about my schedule, I realized that my memory was not just a replay of trauma. It was a database. I documented the times Mara had asked me to sign permission slips for school that I never saw again. I documented the time she had asked for my social security number for insurance updates. I was building my own case, turning my victimhood into data. It felt empowering. It felt like I was finally in the driver's seat. 2 days later, a courier envelope arrived at Harold's office from Blake's lawyer. It contained the sworn affidavit. Harold brought it over to the house. We sat around the table, the mood tense. It is all here, Harold said. Blake throws Renee under the bus completely. He details the ATM withdrawals, the burner phone purchase. He even admits that he drove Renee to the store to buy the phone. But what about Mara? June asked. He mentions her. Harold said. But he says he never spoke to her directly about the plan. It was always Renee relaying messages. Mara says. We need to do it this week. Mara says. Use this notary. It helps. But a defense lawyer could argue Renee was lying to Blake to make herself look more important. Harold flipped to the last page of the affidavit. Because his eyebrows knit together. What is it? I asked. There is a postscript, Harold said. Blake added a handwritten note at the bottom. Says, tell the kid to check the safe. Not the little one in the bedroom. The fireproof box in the garage. Renee told me there is an envelope taped to the back of the bottom drawer. She said it was their insurance policy. In policy, June asked. He says it is the paper the dad signed, but not the one he thought he signed. We all looked at each other. The restructuring documents, Diane said. Her eyes widening. Mara made Gavin sign papers to consolidate the accounts. But what if she slipped something else in the stack? What if she made him sign something he didn't read? If it is taped to the back of a drawer in the garage, I said it means they are hiding it from Dad. Dad goes in the garage every day, but he never looks behind the drawers. We need that paper, Harold said. If that document exists and if it shows Mara tricked Gavin into signing something illegal that breaks her innocent bystander defense wide open. But how do we get it? I asked. I can't go back there. Renee has a restraining order, but it works both ways. I can't enter the property. We don't need you to enter, Harold said. A smile slowly spreading across his face. We are in the discovery phase of a lawsuit. I can request a court-ordered inspection of the property to secure financial records. Will the judge grant it? June asked with this affidavit. Harold held up the paper. And with a police report for child endangerment, the judge will give me the keys to the front door. But we have to move fast. Diane warned. If Renee or Mara finds out Blake is talking, that paper will disappear into a shredder. I will file the emergency motion tomorrow morning, Harold said. We will have a sheriff's deputy escort us to the house by tomorrow afternoon. I looked at the war binder. It was getting thicker. The story was changing. It wasn't just about a sister who was jealous. It was about a stepmother who was drowning in debt, and a father who was too checked out to notice his family was being cannibalized from the inside. They thought I was stupid, I said quietly. They thought I was just a kid who would run away and disappear. They forgot one thing, June said, reaching out to cover my hand with hers. They forgot that you are my granddaughter and we don't run. We fight. I went to bed that night, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the garage, the smell of gasoline and sawdust, the old metal filing cabinet where Dad kept his tax returns. It was such a mundane place to hide a bomb. I realized then that the get out my father had screamed at me wasn't just an order to leave the house. It was the only thing that saved me. If I had stayed, if I had been compliant, if I had let them send me to treatment, I would never have met Diane. I would never have found the truth. Getting kicked out was the beginning of my freedom. And tomorrow, we were going back to collect the rent. The atmosphere in June's dining room had shifted from frantic investigation to a heavy, solemn silence. The rain outside had finally stopped, leaving behind a cold, gray dampness that seeped into the bones of the house. We had the bank statements. We had Blake's affidavit. We had the evidence of Renee's theft. But June was still holding something back. I could see it in the way she moved around the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she dried the same tea saucer 3 times. Finally, she turned to me. She walked over to the antique cedar chest at the foot of the stairs, the one I had been told never to touch as a child, and opened it. She pulled out a blue envelope. It was not a standard business envelope. It was thick, textured stationery, the kind my mother used to use for thank you notes. The blue was faded, the edges soft with age. On the front in handwriting that made my heart stop was my name, Delilah. Your mother gave this to me 3 weeks before the aneurysm took her, June said, placing the envelope on the table amidst the sea of legal paperwork. She made me swear an oath. She said, June, you keep this sealed. You only open it if Delilah is pushed out of that house before she turns 18. I stared at the envelope. She knew. How could she know? Your mother was an accountant. Delilah, June said softly. She didn't predict the future with a crystal ball. She predicted it with risk analysis. She knew Gavin was weak. And she saw how Mara looked at the family finances even back then. She saw the hunger. I reached out and opened the flap. The glue had dried up years ago, so it popped open with a soft sigh. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in my mother's precise angular script. It was not a sentimental love letter. It was a tactical briefing. My dearest Delilah, began. If you are reading this, then my worst fears have come to pass, and you are no longer under your father's roof. I am sorry I cannot be there to protect you, but I can give you the map. I read on my vision blurring. Do not trust the narrative that you are the problem. My mother wrote, I have structured the insurance trust and the education fund specifically to prevent your father from accessing the principal. However, there is a loophole regarding incapacitated beneficiaries. If someone tries to label you as mentally unstable, chemically dependent, or legally troubled, they are doing it to trigger Article 4, Section C of the Trust Agreement. This clause allows the trustee to liquidate assets for your rehabilitation. I looked up at Diane. She called it. She predicted the exact play. Diane nodded. Her face grim. Keep reading. This happens. The letter continued. Check the power of attorney. I never signed a durable power of attorney for you children because I wanted the courts to oversee it. If a document exists giving anyone unilateral control over your legal rights before you are an adult, it is a fabrication. Check the witness. Check the notary. Fraud hates a vacuum. It always leaves a trace. The letter ended with a list. It was a list of account numbers, policy numbers, and the contact information for the original trust administrator data that Mara had claimed was lost years ago. The power of attorney. Harold Klein said, pulling the forged document from the evidence pile. Your mother just gave us the instruction manual on how to dismantle it. We had looked at the forgery before, noting the shaky signature that looked like mine. But we hadn't looked closely at the other signatures. The notary stamp belonged to Carl Vance, Mara's cousin. But there was another signature on the line labeled witness. The name was scrolled illegibly Miller. We need to find T. Miller. Diane said. If we find the witness, we find the lie. Diane spent the next 6 hours on her laptop. She didn't use police databases. She used social engineering and public records. She searched for Carl Vance's known associates. She searched for mobile notary services operating in our county on the date the document was signed. At 7 in the evening, she spun her laptop around. Got him, she said. Toby Miller. He isn't a random witness. He is a driver for a service called QuickSign Mobile Notary. They send notaries to people's houses for urgent documents. So Renee called a mobile notary. I asked. No. Diane said Renee was in school that day. I pulled the phone records for the house landline. There was a call to QuickSign at 9 in the morning on October 20th. But here is the catch. The appointment confirmation wasn't sent to the house email. It was sent to a Gmail account. Diane clicked a key, opening a print out of a subpoenaed email log from the notary company, which he had bullied out of their manager just an hour ago by threatening to expose their hiring of unlicensed drivers. Client Mara Whitaker. Email Mara. Gmail. Com. The room went cold. Mara booked it. I said. Mara called the notary. Mara arranged for her cousin Carl to be the notary of record, but they used the mobile services driver as the witness to make it look legitimate. And the date? Harold pointed out. October 20th. That was a Tuesday. Renee was at school. You were at school. Gavin was at work. So, who signed my name? I asked. Mara did. Diane said. Or she guided the pen. But this email proves Mara was the architect. She wasn't standing in the doorway drinking tea. Delilah. She was the one who called the service. She was the one who paid the fee. Then Diane dropped the second bomb. I decided to look a little deeper into your stepmother's resume. Diane said. Gavin always said she was a homemaker who used to work in retail. That is a half-truth. Before she worked in retail, Mara spent 5 years as a bookkeeper for a small construction firm in Ohio. Construction? June asked. A firm that was investigated for payroll fraud. Diane said they were creating ghost employees to skim money. Mara was never charged. But she was the one managing the ledgers. She knows exactly how to create a paper trail that looks messy enough to be incompetence, but structured enough to be theft. She is a professional. I whispered. She isn't just a mean stepmom. She is a white-collar criminal who married a mark. The realization hit me harder than the rain had. For years, I had directed all my anger at Renee. Renee was the one who bullied me. Renee was the one who spread the rumors. But Renee was just a blunt instrument. Marlo was the hand holding the knife in my father. He wasn't just a bad parent. He was the distraction. He was the puppet she used to give the household an air of legitimacy, while she hollowed it out from the inside. Harold stood up and paced the room. This changes the classification of the case, he said. This is no longer a civil custody dispute. We have evidence of a conspiracy to commit identity theft. White fraud. An insurance fraud orchestrated by a guardian against a minor. I am sending this to the CPS case manager and the district attorney tonight. The next morning, the impact of Harold's email was immediate. Vasquez from CPS called June at 8 o'clock. Her tone had changed completely. There was no more talk of family reunification or mediation. We have elevated the case to level 1. Vasquez said. We are coordinating with the Economic Crimes Unit. We are freezing the assets of the household pending a full audit. And Mrs. Callahan. We are requesting that Delilah not attend school for the next 2 days. We believe there may be a risk of retaliation. Retaliation? The word hung in the air like smoke. We didn't know exactly what was happening inside the Whitaker house, but news in a small town leaks like water through a cracked ceiling. That afternoon, I got a text from a girl I used to know. Someone who lived across the street from my father. Cop cars at your dad's house again. The text read, Renee is screaming in the front yard. It wasn't until later that we pieced together the scene when the bank accounts were frozen. The house of cards collapsed instantly. Renee went to use her debit card at a gas station and it was declined. She called Dad. Dad called the bank and was told his assets were under investigative hold. Renee, the golden child who had never been told no, panicked. She realized the walls were closing in. She tried to play her usual card, blaming someone else. We learned from the neighbor that Renee had run out onto the lawn, shouting at Dad as he got out of his car. It wasn't me. It was Blake, and it was her. She told me to do it. She was pointing at the house, pointing at Mara. But Mara didn't scream. Mara didn't come out onto the lawn. According to the neighbor, Mara simply walked out the front door, took Gavin by the arm, and whispered something in his ear. Gavin, who had looked ready to explode a moment before, suddenly went pale. He slumped. He let Mara lead him back inside the house, leaving Renee crying on the grass. What does she have on him? I asked June that evening. Why does he listen to her? He knows she stole the money now. The bank told him. Fear. June said. She was looking out the window at the darkness. Mara isn't just holding the checkbook. Delilah. She is holding his pride. Your father has a secret. I have always suspected it. There is something from before he met Mara. Or maybe right when he met her that he is terrified will come out. A secret that is worth $40,000? I asked. A secret that is worth his reputation? June said. And for a man like Gavin, reputation is worth more than money. The day before the court hearing, Harold came over to prep me. He looked serious. He wasn't wearing his usual rumpled suit. He was wearing his court armor, a sharp navy blazer, and a tie that looked like it meant business. Tomorrow is going to be brutal, Harold said. We have the evidence. We have the blue envelope. We have the affidavit. But they have a lawyer too. A man named Silas Thorne. He is expensive and he is dirty. Mara must have dipped into a hidden reserve to hire him. What will they argue? I asked. How can they argue against the facts? They won't argue the facts. Harold said. They will argue character. They will try to paint the letter from your mother as the ramblings of a sick woman. They will say Blake is a liar trying to reduce his sentence. They will say you are a manipulative teenager who hates her stepmother. But the forgery? They will claim you signed it and forgot. Harold said. Or that you authorized it verbally. They will try to muddy the water enough that the judge hesitates. He leaned across the table. But we have a strategy. Harold said. We are not going to attack Mara first. We are going to attack Gavin. My dad. He is the weak link. Harold said. Mara is a sociopath. She won't break on the stand. Renee is a mess. She will just cry. But Gavin is a man carrying a heavy load. We are going to put the weight of the truth on his shoulders and see if his knees buckle. Harold opened the war binder to a specific page. It was a timeline of the night I was kicked out. I am going to ask him one question, Harold said. One question about the timeline, and when he answers it, he is going to have to choose between perjury and his wife. He will choose Mara. I said bitterly. He always chooses her. Maybe, Harold said. But there is one thing you need to be prepared for. Delilah. What? When your father takes that stand, Harold said, his voice lowering. He is going to say something. I have seen the preliminary witness list and the summary of expected testimony. He is going to say a sentence that you are not expecting. It is going to hurt. It is going to sound like the final nail in the coffin of your relationship. What is it? I asked, bracing myself. He is going to deny the storm, Harold said. What? But he was there. He pushed me out. He is going to say he told you to leave temporarily. Harold said he is going to say he told you to go to Grandma's house. He is going to try to rewrite history to make himself look like a stern parent, not an abusive one. He is going to look you in the eye and say, I never told her to get out forever. I felt the anger flare up hot and bright. He is a liar. Yet, Harold said. But that lie is the trap, because once he says that, once he commits to the lie that it was a safety measure, we are going to introduce the blue envelope. And the blue envelope proves that the safety measure was actually a premeditated looting of your inheritance. Harold closed the binder. Get some sleep. Delilah. Tomorrow, we don't just win a case. We end a dynasty. I went upstairs, but I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed holding the blue envelope. I traced my mother's handwriting with my finger. I am sorry I cannot be there to protect you. You are here. Mom, I whispered to the empty room. You are right here. Tomorrow, I would walk into a courtroom and face the 3 people who had tried to erase me. I would face the sister who sold me out for clothes. I would face the stepmother who sold me out for debt relief. And I would face the father who sold me out for silence. They thought they were walking into a custody hearing. They didn't know they were walking into an ambush set by a ghost. The courtroom in the Northwood County Courthouse smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a smell I would come to associate with the dismantling of my family. We were in courtroom 3, a small windowless room usually reserved for custody disputes and minor family arbitrations. But today, the air was thick with a tension that belonged in a murder trial. I sat next to Harold Clean. On my other side was my grandmother, June, sitting so still she looked like a statue carved from granite. On the table in front of us sat the war binder. It was 4 and thick. Across the aisle, my father sat hunched over, staring at his hands. Next to him was Mara, wearing a beige suit that made her blend into the wood paneling, her face a mask of polite confusion. And then there was Renee. She was wearing a soft pink cardigan and a headband, trying desperately to project the image of a wholesome, concerned older sister. She wouldn't look at me. Judge Patterson, a woman with reading glasses perched on a sharp nose, called the session to order. We are here to determine the emergency guardianship petition filed by June Callahan regarding the minor Delilah Wright, the judge said, and to address the cross-petition for reinstatement of custody filed by the father, Gavin Whitaker. Harold stood up. He didn't waste time with flowery opening statements. He opened the binder. Your Honor, Harold said, his voice filling the room. This is not a custody dispute. This is a crime scene cleanup. The petitioner intends to prove that the minor was ejected from her home not because of behavioral issues, but as part of a conspiracy to conceal significant financial fraud. Silas Thorne, my father's expensive lawyer, shot up. Objection. Accusatory and irrelevant. It goes to the fitness of the guardian, Judge Patterson said, peering over her glasses. Overruled. Proceed. Mr. Clean. The hearing began with the dry recitation of facts, but it quickly escalated when Harold called Renee Whitaker to the stand. Renee walked up to the witness box. She looked fragile. She wiped a non-existent tear from her eye before taking the oath. When Thorne questioned her, she was perfect. She spoke softly about how much she loved me, how she had tried to help me with my addiction, how scared she was when I became violent. Then it was Harold's turn. He walked to the podium holding a single piece of paper. "M. Whitaker," Harold began, his voice deceptively gentle. "You stated that you found drugs in Delilah's room on October 26, and you stated that Delilah had been stealing money from your father to pay for these drugs. Is that correct?" "Yes," Renee whispered. "It was heartbreaking." "Let's talk about the stealing," Harold said. "Specifically, the withdrawal of $500 from the ATM on Main Street on October 14th. You told your father Delilah took that money." "Yes, she confessed to me." "Interesting," Harold said. He picked up a remote and pointed it at the monitor on the wall. "Exhibit C. The school attendance record." The screen flickered to life. On October 14th, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the exact time of the withdrawal, Delilah was in chemistry lab. We have a sworn affidavit from her teacher. Harold looked at Renee. "Can you explain how my client managed to be in two places at once?" Renee blinked. Maybe I got the day wrong. It was a stressful time. Maybe." Harold agreed. He clicked the remote again. Exhibit D. ATM security footage. The grainy image of the hooded figure appeared. "The person in this photo is wearing a charm bracelet," Harold said. "A Pandora bracelet with a distinctive heart clasp." Whitaker, can you please lift your left wrist for the court?" Renee froze. She instinctively pulled her sleeve down. "Your Honor," Harold said, "I would like the record to reflect that the witness is wearing the exact piece of jewelry seen in the surveillance footage of the theft she attributed to the minor. I borrow her clothes sometimes," Renee stammered, her voice rising an octave. "She must have stolen my bracelet." "And did she also steal your height?" Harold asked. "The withdrawal was made by someone standing 5 feet 8 inches in tall. Delilah is 5 feet 4 inches unless she was wearing stilts in chemistry class." Whitaker, that is you in the photo." Renee looked at Mara for help, but Mara was staring straight ahead, refusing to make eye contact. Renee was on an island and the water was rising. "I was just trying to get the money back," Renee cried out, pivoting to a new lie. "I was trying to replace what she stole before Dad found out." "By withdrawing it from his account?" Harold asked dryly. "That is an interesting way to replace funds." He dismissed her. Renee practically ran back to her seat, her face a blotchy red. Next, Harold introduced the affidavit from Blake Heron. Since Blake was incarcerated in Delaware, his statement was read into the record by the court clerk. The room went deadly silent as the clerk read the words. "Renee told me we needed to get the kid out of the house because the stepmother needed access to the trust fund. She said Mara was directing the paperwork. I watched Mara. She didn't flinch. She was good. She looked like she was listening to a story about strangers." Harold called Mara to the stand. Mara walked up with dignity. She sat down, smoothed her skirt, and looked at Harold with a polite, slightly bored expression. "Mrs. Whitaker," Harold said, "you have heard the allegations. Did you conspire to frame your stepdaughter?" "Absolutely not," Mara said, her voice steady. "I have no idea what that young man is talking about. He is a criminal trying to reduce his sentence. I have always treated Delilah as my own." "You treat her as your own," Harold repeated. "So you handle her administrative needs, her paperwork." "I try to help Gavin." "Yes. Did you help Gavin restructure the family finances 18 months ago?" "I suggested we consolidate for efficiency," Mara said. "That is hardly a crime." "No," Harold said. "But forgery is." He walked to the table and picked up the power of attorney document. This document gives Renee Whitaker full control over Delilah's assets. It is notarized by Carl Vance. He is your cousin. Is he not? He is a distant relative, Mara said dismissively. I use him because he is convenient. And the witness Harold said, Toby Miller, you claimed you didn't know anything about this document. That perhaps Delilah signed it herself. But we subpoenaed the records from QuickSign Mobile Notary. Harold slammed a piece of paper onto the witness stand railing. This is an email booking confirmation, Harold said, his voice hardening. Dated October 20th. Sent from Marv 1980 Gmail. You booked the notary. Mrs. Whitaker. You paid for the appointment with your personal credit card. And you specifically requested that the notary come to the house at 9 o'clock in the morning, a time when you knew Delilah was at school. Marla's composure cracked. Her eyes darted to the paper. I often book things for the family. I don't remember every appointment. You don't remember booking a notary to sign a legal document giving away a child's rights? Harold asked. That seems like a memorable Tuesday. It was just in case. Mara snapped. Her mask slipping. In case she went to rehab. We needed to be able to pay the bills. So, you admit you were planning for her to go to rehab? Harold said. 6 days before the drugs were found in her room. That shows premeditation. Mrs. Whitaker. I didn't say that. Mara faltered. No further questions. Then came the moment I had been dreading. My father. Gavin Whitaker took the stand. He looked 10 years older than he had a month ago. His suit hung loosely on his frame. He looked at me. Then looked away. Unable to hold my gaze. Thorne, his lawyer, tried to rehabilitate him. Mr. Whitaker. Did you believe you were acting in your daughter's best interest? Yet, Dad said. His voice a rasp. I thought she was in trouble. I thought I was showing her tough love. Did you intend to permanently disinherit her? No. Dad said. Never. I just wanted her to get clean. Harold stood up for cross-examination. He didn't approach the stand. He stood by me, putting a hand on my shoulder. Mr. Whitaker. Harold said. On the night of October 26, did you verify any of the evidence presented to you by Renee? Dad looked down. No. Did you call the school to check Delilah's grades? No. Did you check the bank records yourself? No. Renee handles that. So, you evicted your 15-year-old daughter into a storm based entirely on the word of a 19-year-old girl who was stealing from you. I didn't know she was stealing. Dad whispered. You are the head of the household. Harold said sharply. Ignorance is not a defense for child endangerment. But let's talk about the eviction. You claim it was temporary. You claim you didn't mean to cut her off. I didn't. Dad insisted. Looking at the judge. I swear. I just wanted her to go to her grandmother's for a while. Then explain this, Harold said. He reached into the warbinder and pulled out the blue envelope. The sound of the paper rustling was the only noise in the room. Harold walked up to the bench and handed the letter to Judge Patterson. Your Honor, Harold said. This is a letter written by the late Catherine Wright, the child's mother. It was entered into evidence this morning. In it, she explicitly warns that if Delilah is removed from the home under false pretenses of instability, it is likely a maneuver to trigger the liquidation clauses of the insurance trust. Judge Patterson read the letter. Her expression darkened with every line. She looked up at Mara, then at Dad. Mr. Whitaker, the judge asked, holding up the letter. Were you aware that your late wife had structured the trust to prevent you from accessing the principal, unless Delilah was declared incapacitated? Dad looked confused. I knew there were restrictions. Mara said we could access it if we had a medical reason. So, you discussed accessing the money? Harold pounced. We had bills. Dad shouted, cracking under the pressure. The mortgage. The credit cards. Mara said if Delilah went to a program, the trust would pay for it and we could use the household budget for the debts. It was just a loan. We were going to pay it back. The admission hung in the air. He hadn't just kicked me out for moral reasons. He had kicked me out because I was worth more to them as a troubled teen than as a straight-A student. I was an asset to be liquidated. Oh my God, Renee whispered from her seat. She realized what Dad had just done. He had confessed to the conspiracy. Judge Patterson slammed her gavel. The sound made everyone jump. I have heard enough, the judge said. Her voice was ice cold. I am granting the petition for permanent guardianship to June Callahan. Effective immediately. Mr. Whitaker. Your parental rights are hereby suspended pending a full investigation. She turned her glare to Mara and Renee. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am severing the financial fraud aspects of this case. I am forwarding the transcripts of today's testimony, including the admission of Mr. Whitaker and the evidence regarding Mrs. Whitaker and Ms. Whitaker to the district attorney's office. This court finds probable cause for fraud, forgery, and child endangerment. You can't do that. Renee screamed. She jumped up from her seat. It wasn't my fault. It was her. She pointed at me. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. You little witch, Renee shrieked, lunging toward the aisle before the babe stepped in front of her. You ruined everything. You were supposed to just leave. Why couldn't you just disappear? You have always been the problem. Nobody wants you. Dad didn't want you. Mom died to get away from you. The courtroom gasped. It was the most honest thing Renee had ever said. It stripped away the last shred of her good girl costume. She wasn't a concerned sister. She was a jealous, greedy child who hated me for existing. Sit down. Whitaker. Or I will hold you in contempt. The judge barked. Renee collapsed onto the bench, sobbing real ugly tears of terror this time. The bailiff moved to escort us out while the lawyers finalized the paperwork. Marla was already standing, whispering frantically to Thorne, her face pale. She knew the game was up. She knew the DA would be looking at her old debts, her notary cousin, everything. I stood up. I felt light. The weight I had been carrying for weeks, the fear that no one would believe me was gone. My father was standing by the exit. He looked like a ghost. He wasn't crying. He looked hollowed out. As I walked past him, flanked by June and Harold, he didn't reach out. He didn't ask for forgiveness, but as I passed, he leaned in slightly. His voice was barely a whisper, a rustle of dry leaves. Delilah, he said. I stopped. I didn't look at him. I just listened. That night, he whispered, staring at the floor. The night I told you to get out. It wasn't the first time they did this. I turned to look at him, confused. What? The money? He murmured. His eyes unfocused. The missing money from 3 years ago. The reason we couldn't go on vacation. Renee told me then that you stole it. I didn't believe her then. But Mara showed me a receipt. He looked up at me, his eyes full of a terrible realization. They have been framing you since you were 12, he said. I just stopped stopping them. June grabbed my arm. Come on, Delilah. Don't listen to him. He's just trying to share the guilt. We walked out of the courtroom doors into the bright, harsh fluorescent light of the hallway, but my father's words stuck in my chest like a splinter. Since I was 12. It meant my entire adolescence had been a lie. Every time I got in trouble, every time I was grounded, every time Dad looked at me with disappointment, it had all been a slow-motion heist. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had stolen my father's love dollar by dollar, lie by lie. And now I wasn't just satisfied with safety. I wanted them to pay. Not just with jail time. I wanted them to feel the eviction. I wanted them to know what it felt like to be told to get out. The drive to the Seabrook Care Pavilion took me past the turnoff for my grandmother's house. I did not stop. June Callahan had passed away 3 years ago, leaving me with a fully paid-for college degree, a small but comfortable inheritance, and a lifetime of lessons on how to survive a war. Her house was sold. The proceeds placed into a trust that I now managed with the same iron-fisted scrutiny she had taught me. I was 28 years old now. I drove a sensible sedan that I owned outright. I wore a tailored blazer that cost more than the stolen money my sister had blown on her boyfriend. I worked as a senior risk analyst for Northbridge Ledger Works, a corporate compliance firm. My job was simple. I found the rot in companies before it collapsed the building. I was very good at it. The rain was falling again. A light, steady drizzle that washed the dust off the highway signs. It felt appropriate. The story had started in the rain, and today I intended to end it in the rain. When I walked into room 304 of the care facility, the smell of antiseptic and fading flowers hit me. My father, Gavin Whitaker, was lying in the bed. He looked small. The imposing man who had blocked the doorway 13 years ago was gone, replaced by a frail figure hooked up to an oxygen monitor. He opened his eyes when I entered. "Delilah." He wheezed. "You came." "I got your letter," I said. I didn't sit down. I stood at the foot of the bed, keeping the distance between us physical and emotional. "I didn't think you would," he said. He gestured weakly to the nightstand. "I have something for you." The nurse put it in the drawer. I opened the drawer and pulled out a thick manila envelope. It was heavy. "What is this?" I asked. "It is the truth," Dad said. His voice was thin, like paper tearing. "After the court hearing, after you left. I didn't divorce Mara. I know you hated me for that, but I couldn't. She threatened to expose everything. The debt. The tax evasion she had set up in my name without me knowing. She had me trapped." I looked at him, feeling a dull ache of pity. "So, you stayed." "I stayed," he admitted. "But I started keeping records. I started doing what you did. I documented every dollar she spent, every lie she told. And I made a new will." He pointed to the envelope. "Mara thinks she is getting the house." Dad said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "She thinks when I die, the house on Elm Street belongs to her. She is living there right now, waiting for the phone call." I opened the envelope. Inside was a deed of gift, fully executed, notarized, and filed with the county clerk 3 days ago. "The house isn't part of my estate anymore," Dad whispered. "I transferred it. It is yours, Delilah. It has been yours since Tuesday." I stared at the document. The house where I was kicked out. The house where Renee had framed me. The house that Mara had turned into her fortress. "Why?" I asked. "Because it is the only way I can make it right," he said. "I can't give you back your teenage years. I can't undo the night in the storm. But I can give you the power to decide who stays and who goes." He coughed. A wet rattling sound. "I'm sorry, Delilah. I was a coward. I let them hurt you because I was afraid of being alone. And in the end, I died alone anyway." "You aren't dead yet," I said softly. "I'm close enough," he said. "Do what you have to do." I put the envelope in my bag. "Thank you for this. Forgive you, Dad. But I can't be your daughter again. That part of me is gone." He nodded, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes. "I know. Just close the door on your way out." I left him there. I didn't look back. I had one more stop to make. I drove to Elm Street. The house looked exactly the same. The siding was still gray. The bushes were overgrown. But there was a bright yellow Volkswagen Beetle in the driveway. Renee's car. Now old and rusted, but still there. And Mara's sedan was parked behind it. I parked my car on the street. I picked up my bag. I checked my phone to make sure the digital copy of the deed was accessible, just in case. I walked up the driveway. The rain was picking up, drumming against my umbrella. I didn't knock. I used the key that Dad had included in the envelope. The lock clicked. I pushed the door open. The smell of lemon polish was gone, replaced by the scent of stale cigarettes and takeout food. "Who is it?" Renee's voice called from the living room. "Mom, did the lawyer call back?" I walked into the living room. Renee was sitting on the couch watching a reality TV show. She was 32 now, but she looked worn out. Her face was puffy, her hair unwashed. Marlo was sitting at the dining table, surrounded by bills, a cigarette burning in an ashtray. They both froze when they saw me. "Delilah." Renee scrambled to sit up. "What are you doing here?" "You can't be here. The restraining order expired. But you still aren't welcome." Mara stood up slowly. Her eyes narrowed. "Get out of my house," she hissed. "I will call the police." "Go ahead," I said calmly. "Call them. I would love for Officer Miller to come back. He is the chief now." "Isn't he? What do you want?" Renee snapped. "Did you come to gloat? Dad is dying. And you show up now." "I just came from seeing him," I said. "He gave me something." "He doesn't have any money left to give you." Mara spat. "We checked. The accounts are empty." "I know." I said, "You drained them just like you tried to drain mine." I walked over to the dining table. Mara flinched as if she thought I was going to hit her. I didn't. I simply placed the copy of the deed on top of her pile of unpaid bills. "What is this?" Mara looked down. She read the title. Her face went gray. "It is a deed of gift," I explained using my professional voice, the one I used when I told CEOs they were being indicted. "Gavin Whitaker transferred the title of this property to Delilah Wright on Tuesday. The transfer has been recorded. The taxes are paid." "That is impossible," Renee said, walking over to look. "He can't do that. This is our house." "Not anymore," I said. "It is my house and I have zero tolerance for squatters. You can't kick us out." Mara screamed, her composure shattering. "I am his wife. I have rights." "You have rights to his estate," I corrected. "But this house isn't part of his estate. It belongs to me. And since there is no lease agreement, you are trespassing." Renee looked at me, her eyes wide with the same panic I had seen in the courtroom 13 years ago. "Delilah, please. I have nowhere to go. Blake left me. I have debt. You can't just throw us on the street." "Why not?" I asked. "It is raining." "Isn't that the family tradition?" "We are family," Renee cried. "No," I said. "We are relatives. Family protects you. You two are parasites." I looked at my watch. "I have a crew coming in 2 hours to change the locks. You have until then to pack whatever you can carry." Mara grabbed the paper and ripped it in half. "I am not leaving. You will have to drag me out." I didn't blink. I reached into my bag and pulled out another piece of paper. This one was on official letterhead from the sheriff's department. "I thought you might say that," I said. "So, I stopped by the sheriff's office on the way here. This is a formal notice to quit accompanied by a civil standby order. The deputies are parking down the street. I told them to give me 10 minutes to handle this civilly. If I don't text them in 3 minutes, they come in and remove you by force." Mara looked at the window. She saw the patrol car idling at the curb. The fight went out of her. She slumped into the chair, looking suddenly old and defeated. Renee started to cry. But where will we go? I looked around the room. I looked at the spot on the rug where my father had stood 13 years ago. I looked at the stairs where Renee had staged her fake tears. I looked at the kitchen where Mara had planned my destruction. I felt nothing. No anger. No triumph. Just the cool, clean sensation of a balance sheet finally zeroing out. I don't care, I said. I pointed to the door. Get out. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. They didn't argue. They didn't fight. They saw the look in my eyes, the look of a woman who held all the cards and knew exactly how to play them. Marla went upstairs to pack a bag. Renee grabbed her purse and ran out the door, sobbing as she went to her rusted yellow car. I stood in the living room alone. I listened to the sounds of them leaving the zippers of suitcases, the slamming of car doors. When the last car pulled away, I walked to the front door. I stepped out onto the porch. The rain was falling harder now, washing the driveway clean. I took a deep breath. The air smelled fresh. Smelled like my life. I turned around and looked at the house one last time. I wasn't going to live here. I was going to sell it. I was going to take the money and start a scholarship fund for kids who had been kicked out of their homes. I was going to turn this monument of betrayal into a ladder for someone else. I reached for the handle. 13 years ago, this door had been slammed in my face. Today, I was the one holding the key. I stepped inside and closed the door quietly, firmly. The storm was finally over. Thank you so much for listening to Delilah's story. If you enjoyed this tale of justice served cold, please scroll down and leave a comment telling me where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe to Echo Karen Valoji. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. See you in the next video.